I've been getting a lot of messages from many of you asking me to talk about guilt. This is a big topic, something that a lot of us struggle with. It's a complex topic, and it can get muddled in between a lot of other things like remorse and shame. And so we're going to talk about all three of those today, but mostly focusing on guilt in a couple different ways. When it comes to things that we've done that we feel guilty about, when it comes to how we play into other people's guilt, and when it comes to us laying guilt trips ourselves. We're going to clean this up so that we can stop feeling guilty when it's not necessary. And in the majority of the cases, it's not. If you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below so that we can say hello. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you are back, I am so glad to have you here again. I love this community that we have built here together. So thanks for coming back. Either way, my name is Kristina, and I'm a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and the creator of the Shift Society. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I work to help heart-centered go-getter men and women break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And if you are not in the Shift Society, you need to be in the Shift Society. This is where we are taking this work to the next level and doing it with teaching and training and deeper work and help and support and guidance every step of the way. If registration isn't open when you click on the link in the description below, make sure you get on the wait list. But let's talk about guilt. Let's talk about this piece of the crap that holds us back, because it really does. So we do need to clear up a little bit for the intents of this teaching about the difference between guilt and shame and remorse. Because we often use these terms intertwined, and even in a lot of the information out there and a lot of the articles out there and a lot of the definitions out there, it's not really clear which one is which. But I have sort of my own understanding of the difference between the three of them. And so I'm going to tell you that now, and that's what we're going to use here as we're talking about it today. So if we can look at guilt as an acknowledgement that I did something wrong, where we have this barometer, this way of knowing that what we did wasn't good. And so saying something like, I did something wrong, or I did something bad, that would be guilt. Shame is different. Shame is not acknowledging the action as something that we did that was bad. It's acknowledging ourselves as something that is bad. It goes down to that identity piece and thinking that if I did something wrong, I am something wrong. And then remorse is what we feel when we have done something that we're feeling guilty about and we wish we hadn't done it. So it's like regretting it and wishing it hadn't happened. So I hope that that helps to clear things up a little bit about the difference between the three. But first, let's dive into and talk a little bit more about guilt, because guilt is not always a bad thing. When used properly, guilt can be an actually helpful adaptive thing when it causes us to take a pause and take a step back and to question our behaviors, to question our intentions, to question our actions, to question what the outcome could be if we do this thing or don't do this thing. It can help keep us a little bit more in line if we have this barometer of like, hey, I don't want to do this because that wouldn't be a good thing and that would cause problems. And I would feel really guilty if I created a bunch of problems, if I was a really mean person, if I did something really hateful and hurtful. I would feel bad. And I don't want to feel bad about doing that stuff. And so I'm not going to do it. It can also be a good thing when we have done something bad. When we can take a step back and be like, hey, that wasn't cool. I feel bad about having done that. And I don't want to do that again because I don't like this feeling of feeling bad about having done something that was hurtful or harmful or hateful. So in that way, it can be used as a barometer. It can be used well when it keeps us being compassionate and being considerate. When it makes us conscious of our choices. Guilt and empathy are often intertwined. And that's a good thing. We don't want to hurt other people. Empathy is about being able to feel with someone else, to be able to understand what someone else is going through, to be able to put ourselves in their shoes. And then guilt comes in when we acknowledge that we have done something that was hurtful or harmful to someone else, and not wanting to do that because knowing that we wouldn't want to have someone else do that to us. So in that regard, guilt is helpful. When it's not helpful, and there are a lot of ways it's not helpful, when we use it as a form of self-punishment, when we use it to tell ourselves that we're terrible people, and then that crosses over into shame. When we don't say, oh shoot, like I made a mistake, that wasn't cool, I need to do something about this, I need to make this right. We tell ourselves, I am a mistake, I'm a terrible human being, I am a waste of space, I am a horrible person, whatever that is. When we turn that into shame, that is not helpful, it's not productive. It actually creates more unhealthy, unhelpful behavior, because shame begets shame. When I feel like a terrible person, then my emotions are right up here at the surface because I'm in all of this shame right now, and I feel just like awful. Then I'm likely to either lash out, right? Because if something happens that triggers us or that upsets us, we've got nowhere for it to go because we are filled to the brim with shame. We've got nowhere for it to go. We can't process it. We can't take a step back. We can't look at it. We can't understand it. We react, and then we end up doing or saying something hurtful or harmful again, which creates more shame. You see how that works? Or we turn to really unhealthy coping methods to try to numb the shame. So we turn to food or alcohol or incessant social media scrolling or shopping, compulsive shopping, any kind of destructive, unhelpful, compulsive behavior. It's a form of self-soothing because we feel so awful. It's a form of avoiding. It's not the healthy self-soothing. It is the numbing part of it. And that creates even more shame because now we're like, now I've done this thing to try and help myself feel better, but now afterwards it's made me feel worse. So now I have even more shame. So that is when guilt is not healthy or helpful, when we are using it to make ourselves feel worse. And sometimes we think that it's a good thing, right? In our brain somewhere, it's kind of twisted up. We're like, well, maybe if I feel like a bad person, that'll make me a better person. But that's just not true. When we feel like a bad person, we feel like we've got nothing to lose and nothing to gain. This is just the way that we are, and there's nothing we can do. So that's when guilt is not healthy, not helpful, when we turn it into shame. Another way that guilt is not healthy or helpful is when we are playing into it to try to control other people's feelings so we don't have to feel bad. And let me take this one back because I was probably like, what did she just say? But let's look at this. So when someone is saying something and you are feeling guilty, we call it, they're laying a guilt trip on us, but oftentimes it's just them saying things that we are allowing ourselves to believe certain things about ourselves that's going to dictate our behavior so that we don't have to think those things about ourselves, right? So let's give an example. Let's say your mom says to you, oh, you never call me. You used to call me all the time. We call it a guilt trip. Right? We're saying that she's laying a guilt trip on us because we're thinking that we've done something wrong by not calling her. Instead of just saying, like, that is my choice to not call, and I don't have to feel like a bad person for not calling my mom whenever she wants me to call her. I am allowed to decide what I want to do with my time and my choices and my life, and she's allowed to not like it. She's allowed to feel bad about it. She's allowed to have expectations of me that I don't fulfill. But we use it and we take those messages in and we say, oh, I feel like I've done something wrong because someone didn't like what I did or didn't do. And so we feel guilty because we think that if we are doing something or not doing something that someone wanted us to do, then we are somehow doing something wrong. Instead of just letting them have their expectations without us thinking that we need to fulfill them. But then what we do is we think, oh, I'm doing something wrong because they're unhappy. And we talk all about this in the people pleasing video. And I'm going to put the link to that here about people pleasing and trying to make other people happy and how that's just all completely backwards. But we are trying to do this stuff because we want them to feel better. We play into their thing that they've got going. We call it, they're laying a guilt trip on us. And so we play into it so that we can try to make them happy, so that we don't have to feel like we're doing something wrong, so that we don't have to feel like a bad person. So we play right into it because we don't want to feel like a bad person, because we're making it mean. If they don't like it, we've done something wrong. Do you see how that works? And I'm not talking about becoming a narcissist and being like, I don't care about anyone else. I'm just going to do whatever I want. And your feelings are up to you and I'm not responsible for them, because that's just not going to go well. And we're going to find ourselves really lonely and really disconnected from everyone and everything around us. But that you know what I'm talking about here. There is a difference between trying to always make people happy and just being considerate and kind towards other people. There is a difference, and you are allowed to do things that are important to you, even if it's not fulfilling somebody else's idea or expectation of you. It's going to depend on the relationship. If you are in a marriage or in a really close relationship with someone, there is going to be more negotiation that goes on around who's in charge of what and what the expectations are and who's willing to meet what expectation. But that's a whole other topic for a whole other day, and we're not going to go into that. But really looking at guilt, getting curious. What am I feeling guilty about? If I did something wrong, then I can take responsibility for that and I can apologize for that and we can work that out. But if it's just that I'm not meeting somebody else's arbitrary expectation, yeah, maybe we need to have a conversation, but feeling guilty and then doing what they want to try and make them feel good so that we can feel like good people is just not a good strategy, because what it does is it actually doesn't make us feel good. It makes us feel resentful because we feel like we are being manipulated and coerced into doing something and not taking responsibility for our own choices, our own lives, our own time. And then the third way guilt just isn't helpful is when we use it ourselves to try to manipulate other people to fulfill our wants or meet our needs. When we are not being authentic and open and honest with what we want or think or feel, when we're using it as a backdoor method to communicate, it doesn't work and it doesn't feel good, and it ends up creating a bunch of issues in relationships. It creates a bunch of tension. It creates a bunch of anger and resentment within that relationship. And maybe you're doing it because you grew up in a home where it wasn't safe. You weren't allowed to be open and honest and clear and communicate in open ways, in honest ways. And so you learned these backdoor methods, these roundabout kind of sneaky ways of communicating, because that was the only way that you could get your needs met, that you could have your wants heard, that people would be there for you, is if you were able to guilt them into doing it. But now as an adult, we do better because we know better. We know it's not healthy or helpful, even though in our brain, in the back of our brain, we still have that childhood fear that we're going to be rejected, that we're going to be criticized, that we're going to be punished, that something bad is going to happen if we ever speak up in a clear and honest way. And so we're letting that fear dictate, that fear from our past dictate our present. But we can learn better and we can do better now, being open and honest and clear. And I'm going to tell you, I came from a family where there was a lot of enmeshment, a lot of codependence, and a lot of guilt trips. And so I grew up using guilt as a really just sort of normal way of communicating my wants and needs. But the thing is, for better or worse, and at the time it felt for worse, but now I know it was for better, I married someone who does not play into guilt. That stuff does not fly with him. He is not coerced or convinced by guilt in any way. And I learned this really early on when he wasn't feeding into my guilt. He wasn't taking my hint. Even how obvious I thought I was making my hint, he would call me out on it. And he'd say, what are you trying to say? What do you want right now? What do you need right now? What's going on? And he would call me out on it, or else he'd just ignore it altogether and wait until I grew up and communicated like a grown-up. So he didn't feed into it. I couldn't use this as a way to get what I wanted, which is great now because it taught me that this was not healthy and this was not helpful. And it's one of the reasons why our relationship is healthy and strong. And we've been together, me and my husband have been together for almost 17 years, but it's because we communicate. We are honest with each other. We have tough conversations, even if it's hard, even if it's uncomfortable. We ask for what we want. And we don't wait for the person to guess and then get angry and resentful when they don't do it, or we lay hints, or we try to guilt them into doing it. And then that creates all of this drama and all this upset and all this frustration. Guilt doesn't feel good for anyone. It doesn't actually feel good for us either when we are not being honest. We use it because that's what we learned and we feel like that's our only option, but it's not. So guilt can be helpful when we are using it as a barometer for something that we've done that wasn't helpful or kind or good, and we can take responsibility for that and apologize for that and deal with it. It is not helpful when we use it as a way to punish ourselves, to manipulate other people, or to feed into someone else's attempts at manipulation. Learning how to speak up, learning how to say no, learning how to own our voice is something that a lot of us struggle with. And so I have a free download for you. It's called 25 Ways to Say No. You can get it in the description below. It's going to help you get started. And if you want to do this deeper work, if you want to go to the next level, come and join the Shift Society. If registration isn't open, get on the wait list so that you are the first to know, so you can get in there as soon as possible. It's a life-changing place. You're going to love it. Like the video, share it out, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, take good care.